In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a brilliant conversation with Practical Futurist and the host of the Practical Futurist podcast, Andrew Grill. You might remember Andrew Grill from episode 38, way back when we were called the Smart City Podcast. Since we were talking about the future of work this month, I knew it was a perfect time to have Andrew back on the show. In this episode, Andrew and I discussed the skills to implement now to stay ahead of the curve in the future of workspace, and why we should be designing offices for the future flexible workforce. Andrew tells us why he predicts the gig economy trend is going to reach C-suite and executive level, and the 3 Ps for the future of work: people, place, and purpose. We also cover the importance of personal branding and how the notion of personal brands and digital footprints have changed over Andrew's career, plus the idea of employees renting their personal brands to employers. We discuss the need to be practicing digital etiquette and also building trust digitally and in person. Andrew explains the notion of a digital agent, what privacy will look like in the future, and what your data is worth. We finish our chat talking about data literacy, informed citizens, and the broken business model that is interrupting advertising. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Regions, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Andrew. How are you today?
Zoe, great to talk to you once again.
I know. I'm so excited to have you back on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Oh, well, you couldn't keep me away.
Okay, let's jump straight in. And can you, just for people that haven't listened to the previous episode, which we'll have to put in the show notes so people can go back and listen to that, but can you reintroduce yourself, tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, I call myself the Practical Futurist. And when you think about a futurist, you might think of Arthur C. Clarke or any number of the contemporaries. They're great because they look at things that are maybe 30 years out and they look at how the world might shape itself. The clients I speak to, though, are generally the C-suite of the world's largest companies, DHL, De Beers, Vodafone, all those sort of people. And they haven't got 30 years, they haven't got 30 months, maybe not even 30 days. So what I try and do is break down things that are happening not just around technology, but around culture, future of work, AI, all those sort of things, and make it accessible for a senior level audience as to what they should do next week. And actually now in one of my slides, I'm putting a guarantee stamp to say, I guarantee you'll leave this keynote with 5 things you can do next week. And surprise, surprise, that's what happens. But I suppose you might say, well, how am I qualified to do that? I'm obviously Australian. I now live in London, lived here for 13 years. Worked for a bunch of startups, worked for Telstra and Optus, worked for IBM. So I've seen it from large company perspective, small company perspective. I've hired and fired. I've set up and shut down companies. So I think I've got a very practical approach to life and to this whole topic of digital and the future of work.
So what kind of sparked your interest in this future space?
I worked out that I've been a futurist since I left school. When I was in year 12 in Adelaide, I did my English essay with 4 different books: Animal Farm, Brave New World, Clockwork Orange, and 1984. And had I looked ahead of what I was going to be doing, I have been studying and fascinated with the future for some time. And even at Telstra, I did a webcast back in the year 2000, which back then was pretty new. And I was introduced as a futurist. So I suppose I've been doing this for a while without really knowing it. But I'm a technologist. I'm an engineer. So I like looking at how things work, but not, as I said before, not just the technical or technology aspect, how it impacts people. And often when I was at IBM, I'd go in and consult to different clients and they would say, well, you're going to sell us a technology solution. I said, well, maybe. But let's actually look at the culture. Let's look at how your people get work done and how it gets done by other companies and really understand how technology can enhance that. And I was asked the other day, the whole Simon Sinek, what is your why? My why is to teach. I want to transfer the knowledge that I have, that I've gained to people in a way that's entertaining, enlightening, and inspirational.
No, I love that. And I think you do that.
Well, thank you. As you know, I've got a podcast as well, probably inspired by yours. And I thought, why don't I get out there and listen to what people are saying and see if we can help educate some people along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been listening, so it's been really great. And I love the different topics that you have and the different guests that you have on. So yeah, thanks for putting that out into the world. Now you have to remind me of the name of it again. I just downloaded and subscribed.
It's called the Practical Futurist Podcast. Search for it in your favorite app and you'll find it. Comes out every couple of weeks. The latest episode's out today. It basically looks at the future of ... So it doesn't have to be technology. It could be the future of work, which we've done. Today's podcast, for example, is about your digital afterlife, which is something different. But I try and look at the near-term future and break it down to things that people can understand. And as you'd expect, at the end of every podcast, I ask my guests for 3 things that they can tell the audience that they should be doing next week.
No, awesome. Okay, when you came on the podcast last time, we were the Smart City podcast. So I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are now that we're the Smart Community podcast. What is a smart community to you?
Good question. I suppose the notion of community when it looks in a work context is you come to work and these people you spend 8 or 10 hours a day with, 5 days a week, maybe sometimes longer. But then it goes beyond that. So your suppliers are part of your community, your regulators are part of your community, your C-suite are part of your community. So in my world, I have a different client every week because I'm out speaking to different companies in different parts of the world. So my community will change while my near community are the fellow speakers and personal friends of mine. I think the notion of community shouldn't just be, the footy club down at the park, but the sense of community that we want to help each other. And while in many work situations, I think people are striving to do the best they can and climb up the ladder and be ambitious, I think the sense of community as Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z grow up and get into managerial roles, they will have probably more of a collegiate community view of the world to try and help each other rather than to bring each other down. So I'm seeing more that community is important, not just in your own private world, but also when you go to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that take on it. Obviously, we're talking about the future of work and how you, progress forward in this space and what are the things that are going to be really important. And I think plain and simple, community is going to be really important as we move through this kind of uncertain time.
Well, more so where I'm living in London, as we record, we're in the throes of Brexit, and it is a very uncertain time. It changes almost hour by hour. And so I think you have to have your community around you that reminds you that it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this.
Yes, whatever it is, we will get to the other side eventually.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's jump into the future of work. And this is quite a broad question, but when we're thinking about the future of work, what skills could you, implement next week to help you kind of stay ahead of the curve in this space?
Well, I'll give you a real world example. I was asked by a client a few months ago. They said, look, we're a building company. We provide building consulting services. We've got a client who wants to build a building, but in 7 years' time. What should they think about? And so I said, well, I could be really obvious and say you need server rooms, you need open plan offices. But I look at the future of work with the 3 Ps, people, place, and purpose. So when we talk about people, I said what you should actually do is consider that people that come into this building may not come in to work for that company for 5 days a week. I think we're going to see the rise in the next few years of the gig economy for executives. So the moment the gig economy, we think of delivery drivers or people that are freelancers. I think we may have a breed of people who are saying, you know what? I've got to the top of my career. I'm a C-suite executive, but I only want to work 3 days a week for company X. I want to do a day of community service and a day basically researching, and I can afford to do that. So it might mean that even your executives don't need a desk 5 days a week. And so what I provided to this company in terms of advice was, you need some flexibility in the way the floor plate is set out, the way the building and the doors are there, maybe access controls, even who has lunch in the kitchen and where they have it, those sort of things. The whole place then becomes, where am I going to work? It's too easy to say, well, we'll be working from home, because I think back to the community thing. I'm an extrovert. I don't actually like working alone at home. I like going into a serviced office or my private members club, the hospital club here in London, or a coffee shop. I like being around people because I bounce ideas off them. So I think the place of where we come to work, I think human beings will still want to have a sense of belonging, and whether it be in a WeWork or in a Regis or a serviced office or who knows what type of offices might be around in the next few years' time. I think people want to still come together, but it might be that these people are coming together that don't all work at the same company. And then the purpose, I think what I'm hearing is that millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z are saying, I want to come to work because there's purpose, not just because I want to make a lot of money, but I want to change the world, or I want to respond to the climate emergency. I want to have some impact in the world. And so when you put those 3 things together about the future of work, work is a four-letter word. Is it just to an exchange of efforts? So I do a good day's work and get a good day's pay. Is part of it about feeling good about being in the community and actually doing some good? And then where am I going to do that? Am I going to be at home? Am I going to be on the road? Am I going to be in a physical space? I still think, I speak about 60 times a year around the world, and I still pinch myself that people want to come together and sit down in a room and listen to me yell at them for 45 minutes. And I don't think that'll go away, because I think people like being together. And you can't have that experience through a hologram. I'm far less exciting as a hologram or on screen. In fact, when people want me to do webcasts to do keynotes, I turn them down even though they're quite lucrative, because I said, you're just not going to get the same experience. You're not going to hear and see and feel the passion with my delivery. And then when I step down on stage into the community, as I did last week, I was with Royal London, who are an insurer here in London. I stayed there the whole day, and I got involved in the community. At lunchtime, I had lunch with them. They asked me some questions. They got some real value out of my knowledge, and you know what? I learned so much from them. I always say that no matter where I'm speaking, I'll learn more from my community, my audience, than they'll learn from me. I actually picked up 4 or 5 different anecdotes and different stories on that day. So future work is a broad topic. I'm sure every one of your guests will cover it in a different way. I'm a little bit different than I'm not inside a corporate, so I can look from the outside in, and I'm in and out of corporates all the time. But those 3 things, people, place, and purpose, I think are how you can anchor and how you can look at the future work through that sort of lens.
I think the importance of community is a key in this future of work, and it's a really nice angle to put on it. I'm keen to hear though, so when you are stepping into a community, like doing a keynote or stepping down and talking to people, or you're going into a corporate, the importance of you being physically in a place has a different experience. When we become more and more digital, which we already are, how do we continue to, leverage that physical time with somebody and then work out, what bits we can do so we don't have to travel all the time?
Yeah, it comes down to what I call digital etiquette. Now, I'm sure your listeners will all be on LinkedIn, and I'm sure many of you, when you want to connect with someone, will just hit the connect button and hope that someone will connect. That's the same as me walking up to you, giving you my business card and walking away. Why do we want to connect? What I basically try and get people to do is say, look, tell me why you're connecting. There's the personalized invite thing that you can actually have on LinkedIn as well. Explain why we should connect, where we met, and that's a bit of digital etiquette. So you can bring that into the physical and the real world. I think it's a lot easier if you meet someone for the first time and then have an ongoing commercial or personal relationship with them online, where you can't necessarily be in the same room, but you can either see or hear them. That's a lot easier. So when you have that first real interaction, make sure it's worthwhile. And when you follow up, make sure you give them some context as to why you should follow up. I think people forget sometimes that we are all humans, and whether digital makes us easier. You think about it, the number of WhatsApps that you send someone is a lot more than you would ring them. And the last time my phone rang, I can't even remember, because people don't call anymore, they text. And I think we need to think about our digital etiquette to say, would that be okay in the real world? And how can we leverage that to be a little bit more polite or a little less demanding than we are online?
Yeah, I think that's really key, because I do find it quite interesting, particularly on LinkedIn, where you might get a connection and then all of a sudden you're getting everyone's offers. And you're just like, hang on, doesn't even seem like you know what I do. Why are you sending me this stuff? And yeah, it's funny because you would never kind of walk up to someone on the street and hand them a business card. I do realize it's, very different. I think building trust digitally will become more and more important in the future. Other than that digital etiquette, do you have any thoughts about building trust digitally? Like, what if you cannot meet that person face to face? Are there things that you do to build trust?
Well, think about your digital first impression. So when I was at IBM, I was lucky that and I still do, I'd walk into the C-suite of large companies, and I was a bit cheeky. I said, look, before we start the meeting, can I ask you all a question? They go, yeah, sure. What's the first thing you did when you saw my name on the meeting invitation? I said, well, we put your name into Google or LinkedIn to see who you were. I said, thank you. So I can now use that as proof that your digital first impression is so important. If you haven't met someone, how can you trust them? So there are about 17 Andrew Grills in the world I've found over the years, and some are doctors and consultants and all sorts of people. But if you type Andrew Grill into Google anywhere in the world, and I've done this on my travels, I own the front page of Google. And that's not a boast. It's like, I want everyone to understand that this Andrew Grill is a keynote speaker, he's a futurist, he's worked here. And that's because I care about my digital first impression. So I think what your listeners can think about is, if you're going to build trust, and someone types your name into a search engine or into LinkedIn, what are they going to see? And if they see someone else or they see something that's maybe not as you would intend, then that is going to be that first impression. So building trust, I think you can have control over that. If you do Google me, you'll see some of the things that come up are my assets that I own. Some are LinkedIn, some are Twitter, some are other podcasts I've been on. So I have some control over what Google sees and presents about me, where it's my own assets. But other things I'm on, make sure they also put forward the best you. I think that's the best way to build digital trust, because before we know someone, we're going to search for them. And what we see will, to a great extent, reflect positively or negatively on that digital trust.
One of the conversations I was having with Sally Illingworth was about personal branding, which is essentially what we're talking about here. Is you want a bunch of when you're Googling or doing whatever search engine you prefer, what comes up, and having that personal brand. And it's not making up something; it's just making sure that you're consistent across the different platforms and that type of thing. How important do you think this personal brand will be in the future? Is it getting more and more important, and is it changing?
Some people think personal brand's a dirty word. In fact, Sheryl Sandberg is on record saying that she doesn't think people have brands. People are brands, that Facebook is a brand, but people aren't. And I disagree because, like I said, my first impression, especially in what I do. So here's what happens. A company says we need a keynote speaker for an event. Okay, what do we want? We want a comedian. We want someone from the television. We want a futurist. Okay. They type the word futurist speaker London or futurist speaker somewhere into a search engine, and hopefully I come up. So it's not just about a personal brand. It's about how can you understand what I do and how I could add benefit to your organization. And so some people, unfortunately, it go the other way. They think, well, I've got to be, I'm amazing and everything else. I learned a long time ago that I couldn't call myself a thought leader and I couldn't call myself an influencer, and I don't. Influence, thought leadership is earned. And I'm very delighted and flattered if someone says, Andrew, you're an influencer, Andrew, you're a thought leader in this or that, the other. But when I go to someone's website, in fact, if you search the word thought leader on LinkedIn, you get tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that have got that word in their bio. Says who? Who says you're a thought leader? I got a connection request from someone this morning that said they were the number one thought leader in X, Y, and Z. And I went, I'm not going to connect with you because you're not. You might think you are. And so personal brand can go both ways. Either I'm so branded that I'm telling you I'm absolutely amazing, or I let my clients and my reputation speak for itself, and I make it easy to find me. And as you said, I'm consistent. So I've got the same profile picture, I've got the same copy and content, and I tell you what I do and how you can find me, those sorts of things. But I think what we're going to see more of is that just as the influencer market has peaked, and the fact now that Instagram are removing, especially in Australia as a trial, the number of likes on a post, they're seeing that is driving the wrong behavior because likes can be bought. And so I think personal brand could go the way of the influencer market, where everyone has a personal brand. It becomes so noisy and clients don't know what to believe. So authenticity, I think, is going to be a really important thing when it comes to personal branding, if we use that word. For example, on my website, I have a whole page dedicated to testimonials. Here's what other people have said about me, not what I think about me, and you can make your own decision. And I think you need third-party affirmation about everything, not just you saying that you're wonderful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, that personal brand, whatever word you want to use, and I guess authenticity gets thrown around a lot as well, but that's what it's actually about. And it's actually about showing your true authentic self in a consistent way through online medium. So then people know what you're trying to offer to the world. And I think it's going to become increasingly important to have that, I guess, what's the word? The digital footprint, like we were talking about. So then when, particularly in work, particularly that you do, and particularly work that I do, so then people know that's what you do. Because if we're not showing our wares and then not getting those other people to tell us and give us recommendations and all those type of things, then we're going to get lost in, the noise of influencers and thought leaders and whatever else we have around the world. And so I think it's going to be really interesting between, having this authenticity and who you are, and then the fact that you might still work for an organization as well, and you're an employee potentially, how that will change your employee-employer relationship moving to the future. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Oh, yeah, I get asked about this all the time because I've been in it 3 different examples. So I've worked for 6 different startups over a 12-year period in between Telstra, Optus and IBM. And 2 of those, I actually had some quite difficult conversations with the founders because the company brand was brand new. And I was brought in to basically build it up and get them promoted and get them clients. And so there was a point where the company brand and my brand, I won't say were competing with each other, but they were, they were becoming popular and I was becoming popular. And both these founders sat me down and said, Andrew, are you out there for our brand or your brand? I said, I'm there for both. Your brand went from nothing to something. My brand's always been there. You started leveraging off my brand. I'm now leveraging off yours. The other example was IBM. I will never, ever, ever be bigger than the IBM brand. There's no way. So when I joined IBM in 2013, one of the things I said to them was, I want to keep my public speaking up and I want to keep blogging. And they said, well, that's one of the reasons we're hiring you. We know that you come to us with a brand and you come to us with a community. And we want to leverage off that. And you will get the benefit of leveraging off the IBM brand, which I did and I do. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And in fact, I'll go further. When they asked me, the person who hired me said, what do we have to pay you? It wasn't, this is what we're going to pay you. I actually added on top of what I thought I was worth, the value of my personal brand. And they said yes. So I actually put a value on the brand and put it in the mix. And they actually bought that. Now, what I think happens when you're an employee, you go to work, you're actually renting your brand to an employer for the period of time that you're there. Now, if you're someone like me that has a well-established, well-thought-out, easy-to-find brand, that's going to be really useful for the company you work for as well as for you. And for those that don't and leverage and build a brand while they're there, that's great as well. And people say, well, if Andrew has a great brand, a great LinkedIn profile, he's going to leave. You bet. I'm going to leave at some stage. But I'm less likely to leave if you feel like my brand is helping yours and vice versa. And for the moment that we're together as an employee and an employer, you're renting my brand. When you think about it that way, they get the benefit while I'm there. And when I've left, they hang up the benefit and they get the benefit from someone else.
And do you think that's changed recently? Or has it always been there, just not as many people utilizing it or doing it?
I've had an online presence since 1983. Not sure if that was before or after you were born, but I've been online since 1983. I've had a website since 1994, a domain name since 1999. I've been doing this for a while. So my digital footprint is fairly long. There's a long tail there. In fact, if you go to a website called archive.org, it's called the Wayback Machine, you can actually go back in time to see what my website, your website, Google's website looked like all those years ago. So you can actually say, yeah, Andrew really has had a presence since 1999 because there's evidence there of stuff that was there. So I think I'm an edge case where I've been doing this for a while, and so my brand through osmosis has improved and become further and further afield. I think for someone who maybe starts a new executive job and they're told, well, you have to have a brand, we've got to get you out there, sometimes can be really uncomfortable because for some people, pushing what they're doing, they're a bit modest, and especially here in Britain, British people are notoriously modest, and so you won't find a lot of British people yelling from the rooftops about how wonderful they are. So it can actually be something that's quite uncomfortable for some people to do. And so has it changed? I think more people are now realizing that they have a brand and they can leverage it, and things like LinkedIn make it really, really easy. I think I'm one of few people that have a personal website. I've got andrew.london, for example, and when I give that a web address, they go, is it .com, .co? No, it's andrew.london. It's my name and where I live. And that also telegraphs that I know what I'm doing. I've picked a name that is you can remember and those sorts of things. So I think that I'm an edge case. It's probably unfair to ask me versus someone that's just become an exec in a consulting firm. But what I've done in the past, and IBM and beyond, I've actually consulted and coached people to do this. I've said, well, I'll save you 10 years of pain. Here's what you need to do to what I call rise above the noise. There is so much noise about there. And as an engineer, we're taught that the noise floor, if I'm quiet for a second, that's the noise floor of the podcast. That's what nothing sounds like. So how do you rise above that and not be noisy, but be relevant and useful? So I often coach my clients, how do you rise above the noise floor? There's some simple things you can do to do it in a very authentic way that gets you noticed.
And I think that's going to be really key for the future of work, because employers, and particularly I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, being able to attract and retain talent is obviously going to be paramount. I mean, it's always been paramount, but it's going to be more and more so as things become automated and we all kind of rise to the same level playing field. Like, the smallest company can afford the same tools as the biggest company. However, the creativity and the humans and the curiosity and all those amazing human skill sets, that's what's going to differentiate people.
Absolutely. And being able to bring yourself to work, being able to have and cultivate a personal brand while you're there, the employers that see that and go, we want you to do that, will thrive. I'll give you an example of an organization. I won't mention them by name, but I was asked to actually move to New York on on a lower salary than I had been working in the UK. So that's already a negative. And they said, a couple of other conditions. We want you to stop blogging and stop public speaking. And I went, that's not going to work for me. One, because that's not my natural style. I think, in fact, why they asked me to do that was because the other people on the team didn't have as developed a personal brand. They thought it would be jarring because the manager would have this brand to be on stage and they wouldn't. But that's like telling me to stop speaking. I'll stop doing podcasts. That's not me. So you can understand how I declined that offer. But they didn't understand the value. They didn't understand the value of me being on stage. For example, when I was at IBM, let's rewind. When I came to the UK 13 years ago, I was working for a location-based services company. And we had to pay £8,000, so $15,000, to sponsor an event to get me on stage to speak. Fast forward to 13 years, even at IBM, I was being paid to be on stage as me, as someone that worked at IBM, because they wanted me there. It was nice that they had the IBM brand behind it, but to go from having to pay to play to actually be paid to play is very, very different. And it shows the power that organizers want individuals who are seen as thought leaders, are seen as influencers to be at their conferences. And the fact they work for large organizations is even better.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously something, maybe not obviously, but things that I've been thinking and doing and changing now for me, and how I continue to do consulting work as well as the speaking, because ultimately I love speaking, but I want to speak on stages where I am talking about things that I know what I'm talking about as well. So obviously that clout is very important, which you've built over many, many years. What I find interesting is the different views of different companies and organizations and also conferences and things about how different those internal workings are. It's really, really fascinating. And I think the value of the brand and who you are and whatever, obviously building over time, and different people are building at different rates and in different markets and different fields, is going to be so key. And I think that particularly for government, it's going to really struggle to retain talent if they're not allowed to speak on stage as themselves, as themselves, and also somebody that works for government. Wondering, like globally, if you've seen shifts and changes in that space.
Oh, look, I've even seen people from Google. They would start a presentation with the forward-looking statement, and the first 3 slides were all the disclaimers. Then I have Google people in the audience. And, I don't think I could work for a large organization that wouldn't let me be myself. I think I'm an adult. I've been in business for 30 plus years. If you don't know that I know what to say and what not to say, then that's a bit sad. So I think back to the government thing, I think that's challenging. As you're talking, I mean, with my VPN, I can watch the ABC TV show Utopia that those in Australia will know about. It's a fictitious government organization. I look at that and I know that it's so close to the truth. And that's why it's funny, because people that work in government will go, that's exactly how it works, because everything is so regulated. But then again, you think about the politicians, the ministers, they're the ones that get to be on stage and they know what to say and what not to say because they're controlled and everything else. I think you're right. The people that want to speak and have something to say, here's a phrase that's interesting. Your value to an organization isn't what you know, it's what you share. I think that's true within an organization. The knowledge is power. Before the older generation, I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on because then I don't have my power. But you think outside the organization, if you're able to share knowledge, insight, wisdom, your power to the organization, both inside and outside, raises exponentially. But here's the problem. Humans get jealous. Why is Zoe on stage? Why is Andrew on stage? Why am I not on stage when I'm more senior than him? Well, because Andrew and Zoe articulate the platform or the information in a better way than maybe you do. And maybe you'd like to do that and we can coach you, but it's a jealousy thing, because there's the thing about, whenever I'm in the audience, whenever I'm speaking, I look at the audience, I know that 99% of people in that audience don't want to be doing what I'm doing. So I'm already in front. So there are very few people that want to do what we do. But those that do should just be allowed to do it, given guidelines, given, know what to say and what not to say. The hardest time sometimes is Q&A. You've done a 45-minute keynote, it's been approved by legal, then someone asks you a curveball. I've had IBM press people in the audience kind of, almost flashing a sign at me, you can say that, you can't say that. So I know how it works. I know the needs to be a good corporate citizen and not say things you're not allowed to say or not authorized to say. But again, you can say, well, this is my opinion. It's not the opinion of the place I work. But I think it's still a minefield, because if I work at IBM and I said something negative, even though I said that's my personal view, I could feel myself when I was at IBM censoring myself mid-sentence. I can't say that. I can't say that. Give you a good example. I remember I was being delayed on a plane at Heathrow, and on stepped 3 British Airways crew. And the reason we were delayed was because of the crew. Now, in the old days, I would just tweet, silly British Airways, why didn't you just leave without the crew? But then when I got to IBM and a BA is an important client, well, I can't do that. And I don't think I'm censoring myself and it's wrong to do that, but they're an important client. It probably isn't a big deal that we're a bit delayed. And if I tweet that as an IBM person and I'm attacking a major client, that's not going to help anyone downstream. So I think you need to be aware of what you can and can't say, and what's going to get you in trouble, and what probably isn't fair.
That's the other thing too. I think what you said about being an adult is also really key, because we know, what those boundaries are, and also setting those boundaries as well is really important, because we also don't want to be super negative when it's just, I don't know, we've had a bad day, or we have this knowledge that no one else has, so it won't even make sense to anybody else regardless. And so I think, it is really key to, I guess, just, I don't know, not worry about it so much also, because at the end of the day, you like the organization you're working for, you're there to be a positive or an inspirational keynote or whatever. Getting bogged down in the details and what, I should say this, I shouldn't say this, but actually censoring, as you say, which I think we do regardless of where we work or what channel we're actually talking on. We do this anyway. But I do really think that when we are moving into this future of work, the fact that so many of those things will be captured, so many of those things will be available to the whole world, really considering those, what we want our digital footprint to look like as well. Do we want it to be us ranting about something, that doesn't even matter anyway? Or do we want it to be still delivering the message, but having that, I guess, responsible and mature approach to the question or the answer or the context?
Well, the way I look at it, that when, again, using IBM as an example, because everyone knows the company, if I appear eloquent and smart and forward-thinking on stage or in front of a client, the client might just think there are more people like Andrew and we should hire that company because, golly, if Andrew is the face of this organization at this moment in time, that means they're probably lots more like him. And I'm actually sort of selling in the services because I was in the consulting area. So I wanted them to see the best that IBM could deliver, knowing that there's an army of people behind us that could also help deliver the services. So you obviously want to put your best foot forward so that they hire you and the company.
Okay, we've talked a lot about speaking and a lot about personal branding, and it's been really interesting. And thanks so much for sharing your insights. And I think it really is a useful topic to be discussing, because I think it's going to become more and more important, and people are realizing, particularly I think as we, not just, I think people talk about millennials and the younger generation, but actually though, people at the middle management, the C-suite, the ones that want to move up in the space, and also people that have no or a very small brand now that actually want to build that for the future. And, what, depending on where they want to work, how they do that to rise above the noise. I think that's really important. So I'm really keen to hear your thoughts about what jobs are we really looking at, I guess, full automation, and what jobs are we looking at that are going to actually increase in the labor force?
Well, I think any job that can be done by robots will be done by robots, and banks are seeing that, and we're going to see more and more of that happening. But this is not new. So we've had the Industrial Revolution, we've had the Internet Revolution, we've had all sorts of revolutions where roles have been displaced, and we found better, faster, cheaper ways to do it with machines. And so this is nothing new. But I think going forward, the jobs that will survive are ones where you need to have a level of empathy, because I don't think we're yet able to program robots with empathy. So where you have to decide good or bad, or love or like, or love or hate, I think humans will still be needed to do that. I talk a lot in my talks about the notion of a digital agent. So at the moment, the phone you hold in your hand knows everything about you. It knows when your next podcast recording is, knows your bank balance, knows your next flight. Imagine if you could, with permission, give all that to an AI-powered robot, and it could then run the minutiae of your life. So your health insurance is due in November, rather than having to go on a price comparison website, see whether you get a good deal. Your AI-powered robot knows that, and it goes out and does a digital deal with all of the other potential suppliers. What this means, though, and when I say this, I get yelled off the stage by advertisers, is we won't actually be reading ads. We'll have to write ads for robots because my AI-powered digital agent will block any noise that's coming through unless it can learn or it can see that that's one of my preferences. So I think what that'll actually do, and I do believe this concept will happen because it already Google with Google Duplex is allowing AI-powered bots to make phone calls to restaurants and book things and allow us to focus on a high-value task. And that's, again, nothing new. But it means we'll need time to think. I did a TEDx a couple of weeks ago for one of the banks here in the UK, and I talked about the innovative power of a Post-it note. And when you innovate, you've actually got to have time to think. And ironically, the Post-it note only came about because 3M allowed their employees 15% of their time to think. And when the original inventor wanted to invent some really sticky glue and it didn't work, one of his colleagues, Arthur Fry, played around with it, did some innovation and developed what we now know as the Post-it note. So I think the jobs that will survive will be ones where humans need to think. And I think deeply. Think deeply about planning, about empathy, about how to treat human beings properly. And I would love the minutiae of my life to be run by a robot. I had on episode 3, James Poulter, one of my guests, talking about voice. And he said, we're not far away from a thing called ambient voice, where at the moment, your voice-powered assistant, whether it be Alexa or Siri or Google, you have a wake word and you say, hey, Google, or hey, Siri. Only then does it listen to your command. What about if, with permission, it's listening to a conference room conversation? You go, I need a meeting room this size in 2 weeks' time in wherever. And it hears that and then goes and books it for you. Or it hears that the way you're phrasing your words, you're sounding a bit down today, and it basically says, are you okay? So I think technology will be used in a very different way to streamline our lives, but the jobs that will survive, the ones that people should be studying now, are where you have empathy and where you have to think and make decisions that only humans can decide.
On the last episode, we talked a little bit about GDPR. I think it had just come out when we were recording. For the future, where do you see that moving to, privacy? I guess, California's just released, or it's coming into effect in January. Privacy of data. I guess security is one thing as well, but I'm really keen, and it's something I want to explore a lot further and a lot deeper, is what will privacy look like in the future?
Privacy is about a value exchange. I'm happy to give you my data, all of it, if I get something in return. When I don't want you to have my data and I don't know what you're going to do with it, that's when I want it to be private. So I want the default to be, you can't have anything unless I let you. What we talked about last time, GDPR, the General Data Protection Act that launched here in the UK and in Europe 2018, it basically cleaned up a 20-year-old piece of legislation. The Data Protection Act was 20 years old. It was written before email marketing and social media existed, so it couldn't cope with companies. Now, in fact, recently the Australian government have produced a paper where it looked closely and it called out Google and Facebook in terms of their market power. And an addendum to the report, and I encourage people in Australia to have access to it, I think it was ASIC that released it about the digital divide. They actually went in to see how hard it was or what you're giving away when you sign up for a new service with Google or Facebook. And as they said, there is nowhere to negotiate. It is all or nothing. You either accept all the terms and conditions or you don't get to use my services. So I think when we talk about privacy, it won't just be, I want to withhold my data because it's private or it's my birth date or something like that. It's where's the value exchange? I want to actually negotiate with Facebook to say, I'm happy with that term, I'm not happy with that term. And maybe that's where my AI-powered digital agent comes in and does a digital deal that actually includes a specific contract for that particular service that it's providing based on what I am willing and not to provide. Because I think as individuals, we're probably worth $10,000 to $20,000, pounds, euros a year in terms of our valuable information. And at the moment we give it away, the phrase is, if the product is me, the product is free. Now in the UK, back in March last year when GDPR came out, we had the Cambridge Analytica expose. If you have Netflix, you need to watch a documentary called The Great Hack. The Great Hack basically goes behind the scenes and exposes what went on and what your data is worth. So again, privacy is more about a value exchange. I'm actually happy to give you every piece of data if I get a fair value exchange. Now, it might be that you process it and give me back high value data. So I give you my Fitbit information or my banking information, and you give me back something that's processed in a higher value information. It could be all sorts of things, but I want some value, discount, money, cryptocurrency, special offer in return for it. And at the moment, we can't do that. It's all or nothing.
Do you think that'll change in the very near future?
Because I think we've now got empowered consumers. I think, if anything, the great hack and the Cambridge Analytica expose taught consumers is he was on the front page of the newspaper and the front lead item on the news, and consumers are going, Facebook did what with my data? I had no idea. You and I know that because we work in this industry, what happens and where the data flows. But the fact that consumers are now saying this is not right. And so while the ACA or the ASIC report in Australia was a good first start, unfortunately, Australia won't change the perception of the FANGs, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. But when the UK then have a similar rule and the US have a similar rule, I think we're going to see, in fact, the other day, Mark Zuckerberg, there was some leaked audio where he said, Elizabeth Warren, if she gets in as president, is going to shut us down and break us up. Well, maybe that's what we need for them to realize that you can't have unlimited access to people's data with no value exchange. Famously, Sheryl Sandberg was asked by a TV reporter around the time of the Cambridge Analytica stuff, well, what about if I don't want ads? What services would that be that you would provide? And Cheryl said, that would be a paid service. You would pay us to use Facebook. I'm okay with that. If there's some value in me paying to use Facebook and you don't use my data, I would pay for it. Just as my digital agent, I'm probably going to have to pay $500 or $1,000 or pounds a year for that service. But it means that I'm actually getting real recommendations rather than what advertisers want to give me. So to answer your question, I think we are in the zone now where empowered consumers like me are demanding it. And as more people demand it and can see the value, they're going to say, I don't want to give my data away. I know I get free Facebook or free WhatsApp, but that comes with limitations.
It's on the other side of that informed citizen. I really feel like you or I may be informed to a certain amount, but also, we might know, but then as you said, there's no option other than to play. So there's no negotiation that we can do at the moment to pay for a Facebook or a whatever. But on the other side of that, for the general public and the community, they're not informed, and that really concerns me a lot.
Governments have to play here. And this is why the report I mentioned from the government is an important step, because they're saying, we realize that these companies have got so much power, and short of regulating them, we need to scare them enough to go, well, stop. You're making billions and billions of dollars of profit out of consumer data. You need to start giving some back. And when it is the front page news, and when it does write headlines, then I think they're getting a bit worried. Mark Zuckerberg, when he started Facebook as the Facebook, was doing it because he was a geek and wanted to, meet girls or whatever the reason was he did to start the Facebook. But then he realized that servers and developers cost money. And the easiest way to pay those bills was to whack advertising on the site. Advertising is broken. If you believe in my digital agent model and they will be running ads for robots, I won't see ads. And if I don't see ads, how does Google, Facebook, and the other companies, how do they make money? I think they're very exposed because the model they're using is an interruption model from 50 years ago on television. And so I think we will, in the next 5 years, see a step change in how advertising is delivered, bought and sold. We'll have consumers like you and I, and then your friends. I mean, I'm sure your family and friends come to you and say, Zoe, what's all this stuff with Facebook? What does it really mean? Should we change our privacy settings? Should we do Facebook suicide and remove ourselves from it? What's it all mean? And the more that people like you and I talk about this, the more podcasts there are, I think the debate will help to change the perception. But you're right, at the moment, it's either you agree with all of Facebook's terms or none, and that's not right.
No, it's really interesting, really fascinating. And I also watched The Great Hack, and I was just thinking about where I heard the report, and it must have been on your podcast. And it's something I need to dive really deep into, because it's an area that the informed citizen part of that. And I really think that's where the government has a role, where they provide public schooling. Now it's data literacy. And I just think once we are more informed, it will scare the shit out of, big companies. And so it should. And it's not to say that you won't make the same decisions. That's fine. If you say, yep, no worries. Like you said, you exchange value. Yep, you can have all my data. I'm going to, you're going to give me this in exchange. Cool. That's awesome. But when we don't know, and when we don't really have a choice, like it's nearly Like with water, you have to say yes to water and you just pay whatever it is, but it's not like they're collecting all this data that then they're selling on you. Maybe they are. I don't know. I don't think so.
Well, they probably are because they've got your address, they've got your phone number, they've got your first name, your last name, they might have your date of birth, they've got your credit card details. They're selling your data and all you're getting in return is water. That's not really fair.
So interesting. Well, I better wrap this up. It's been so great to chat with you, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I really want to have another chat at some point as well. So maybe we'll make this a regular occurrence. It would be great to.
Well, I clearly have an opinion, whether it's people agree with me or not. But I want to start a discussion. So if people have listened to what I've said and they agree or disagree, I'd love them to contact me. Go to andrew.london. You can find out more about me there. But I want someone to go, no, you're wrong, because I love to learn. So if people out there really vehemently disagree with what I've said, please start a dialogue. This is how the world changes, because people disagree constructively and then find solutions.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with people disagreeing. I want to hear from people that disagree with what I'm saying, and I want to hear why. Let's talk about the why. And I think once we start talking about the why and not the what, or not the, just the surface level of, no, that's wrong, or that's right, or that's whatever. When we talk about the why, I think we can come to some really amazing insights and have some really deep discussions, because it's not about being right or wrong anymore. It's just why we think the way that we think based on our experiences, our expertise, the other conversations, our communities, all those type of things. And I just think that's so fascinating.
It is indeed, yeah.
Okay, well, I just have one last question, which is how can people connect with you?
Well, as I said, andrew.london, think of my name and where I live. Everything is there, the podcast, my blogs, videos, speeches, testimonials, even a way to contact me. Love people to find me there, or on the Twitter @AndrewGrill.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming onto the podcast, and I look forward to our next conversation.
So do I. Thanks, Zoe.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter @SmartComPod. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.